Okay.
And we are live on YouTube.
Okay, great. I'm gonna turn that off because I don't want the feedback from it. Okay. So welcome to the, should we wait for more participants to come in or should we get going? We should get going.
Yeah, I think we should get going.
Okay, great. Welcome to the Willow Springs virtual reading series. We've been doing this since our world changed last spring. And this is one of the few very nice results of a very tragic and grim time. We've got tonight we've got three of my favorite contemporary, among my favorite contemporary writers, Rebecca Brown, Kevin McIlvoy, and Melissa Kwasny, all three of whom have had work published in Willow Springs, and all three of whom we have interviewed for Willow Springs. And I want to say I'm really interested in hearing these writers in conversation, their work in conversation, and also in the Q&A at the end, because I think that they have a lot in common. I find them to be ethical, compassionate, and spirit-infused writers. And I want to thank the Willow Springs staff for putting this together. In particular, Sam has run the technology, and Carling, Connor, and Jen are the web and social media presence that have been letting everybody know about the event. And we're going to start off tonight. Oh, and also we are having a gathering afterwards. If you would like to come to that gathering and you know somebody in the reading, myself included, or any of the staff members from Willow Springs, just email that person and they will pass on the invitation to the after gathering. Okay, so we're going to start tonight with Rebecca Brown. I first encountered Rebecca's books when I was working in an independent bookstore in Astoria, Oregon in the 1990s. I immediately fell in love with the work. I ordered all her titles and I put them in the store window. Rebecca's work spoke to the marginalized life I lived. More importantly, it validated all the strange things I felt compelled to write. She wrote with such confidence, such wicked humor and terse language. Her work brought the darkest parts of me out into the light, that black psychic river of our worst nightmares. I didn't know how deeply one could engage in that world as a writer, and I didn't know how to do it well, as Rebecca Brown does, with emotional integrity and compassion. Years later, when I moved to Seattle, I sought Rebecca out and became her student. I know I am not the only writer who has been deeply influenced by her work. Paul Constant for the Seattle Review of Books writes, "The word I would use to describe Rebecca Brown is elemental. She's a genius at the invisible forces that bind words together. It feels dangerous and exciting, like if she puts her big brain to it long enough, she could completely rewrite the story of who we are." Rebecca Brown is the author of Not Heaven Somewhere Else, by Tarpaulin Sky Press. It came out in 2018, and a dozen titles of fiction and nonfiction published in the US and abroad, including American Romances, The Last Time I Saw You, The Dogs, The Terrible Girls, all published by City Lights, The Gifts of the Body, excerpts from a family medical dictionary. Rebecca has been awarded the Boston Book Review Award, the Lambda Literary Award, a Pacific Northwest Bookseller Award, 2 Washington State Book Awards, and a Stranger Genius Award, as well as grants to MacDowell, Yaddo, the Malay Colony, and Hawthornden Castle. Her altered texts and installations have been exhibited in the Frye Art Museum, Hedron Gallery, Arizona Center for Poetry, and elsewhere. Her work has appeared in magazines and journals in the US, the UK, and Japan, and her books have been translated into Japanese, German, Dutch, Norwegian, and Italian. She has also written a play, a one-woman performance talk, and a libretto for a dance opera. Rebecca was the first writer in residence at Hugo House. She's co-founder of the Jack Straw Writing Program and former creative director of the Pacific Northwest Conference in Port Townsend. She taught in the low residency MFA program at Goddard College and is currently senior artist in residence at the University of Washington, Bothell. She lives in Seattle. Her fiction was featured most recently in Willow Springs 84, and her interview appears in the same issue. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Polly. What a tremendous, generous introduction. I appreciate that so much. Thank you. And thank you for, us crossing paths, I guess more than 25 years ago. And thank you for your own work, not only as an organizer and a teacher, but of course, as a writer whose fiction is of substance and heart and generosity. So thank you, Polly. So I'm going to read from a couple of different things today. I'm going to start with, I've changed the order of this, so I'm thinking of this, rethinking it as I go. But Polly mentioned the sort of darkness in some of my work. So I want to start with that rather than move towards it, and read a piece that kind of, I guess, talks about that darkness, but also something. I should just stop yammering and just read the work. This is a piece called Someone Else, and it is included in the book that Polly mentioned called Not Heaven Somewhere Else. Someone else is in here, not just me. There isn't room for both of us. There isn't room for me, but she abides inside with me. I think she's always been here, for she indicates she was, though I have only recently admitted her. When she is good, apparently, she's still and very quiet, and except for the fact I know she's here, I almost wouldn't know. But other times, and these times seem like all the time when we are in them, she is awful. I don't know why she stays. She thinks I'm awful, hates me, loathes the ground whereon I walk, the very fact I do. I don't know why she lets me stay. She makes me. Perhaps she wants to keep me here, perhaps where I belong. I have tried surrender. I have begged for my release. She will not answer. Tell, I beg her, tell, but she will not. I don't know when I first discovered her. I say discovered, but the more I learn, the more I know that she has always been. Maybe she was waiting for a special time. She has a certain flair for the dramatic. When I have tried to keep her under wraps and out of sight, she demonstrates. When I have tried to tell of her, she hides. I have tried to go away, but there is no place I can go without her. I have tried hard. I have tried very hard to rid myself of her. I have tried to hold my breath, to pour the poison in. I tried it very hard. I would. She always intervenes. I can't get rid of her. Oh, that's ridiculous. I could. I've read the books about the ways, and they are numerous. The ordinary home, the common street, a grocery or a hardware store, they each have all the necessary means. A child could do it. I wonder if I could have gotten rid of her, if, when I was a child or first discovered her, I could have gotten rid. And if I could it have been without the loss, or rather, maybe less the loss that getting rid of means? I tell myself, and I pretend and hope she is preparing me. that she has come to ready me to make me worthy. I wonder, is she merciful? I hope and pray. I tell myself she is. So that's from a book that came out in 2018, though the story goes back much before that. I'm going to jump from that one, which has a reference at the end of that piece to being a child and remembering childhood and trying to understand it retrospectively, into more of a kind of straightforward essay from and about childhood. And this is from my book called American Romances. And this is just the opening part, the first part of the essay. I think I was nostalgic as a child. Even before I knew that word, I had the sense that the best was already over with. I remember once when I was little, I don't remember exactly how old, my sister and I were given matching baby dolls for Christmas. They weren't fancy the way some of the dolls they were starting to make in those days were. They didn't talk if you pulled a string or wet themselves if you put water in their mouths. Their arms and legs didn't move and their eyes didn't open and close, and they weren't the size of real, actual babies. They were dolls, maybe 6 or 8 inches long, of soft beige plastic with painted on eyes and hair, brown for my sisters, blonde for mine. What I do remember is how I felt when we got the dolls. I loved the fact that my sisters and my dolls were not fancy, that our mother was acting as if these simple dolls would be enough for us. I loved, but was also sad that as matching dolls, they both had flower patterned dresses on, one yellow and one blue. They were meant to suggest a closeness between my sister and me that we had never had. I knew kids who dressed in matching clothes, and I also knew that unless there was something wrong with them, they would not keep doing that when they were older. There was something about being little that allowed that, but whatever that thing was, it would go away when you grew up. Something would happen, and one day you wouldn't want to be like your brother or sister or anyone in your family. My sister is 7 years older than me, and if she was still young enough to have been given a baby doll, she couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, which would have made me 2 or 3. And while she liked playing with dolls, she did not like being paired with me. I didn't like playing with dolls that much, but I remember wanting my sister and me to play with those dolls together so that our mother would be happy. My mother had read Laura Ingalls Wilder's books to us, and there was that part where their grandfather or somebody brought the kids oranges for Christmas. The kids were thrilled with the oranges. They didn't know whether to eat them immediately or to save them. We, on the other hand, had oranges all the time in Florida, and nothing any of us had meant half as much as those oranges did to the Laura Ingalls Wilder's kids. I don't remember ever playing with those poor dolls together, but now, after hating how she treated me when I was a child, I can look back and sympathize with my sister. When she was born, my sister was her mother's only child, her princess, her adored. My father was not around for the birth, but when he did finally see his firstborn, he was proud. Like most men in the 1940s and 50s, he didn't know what to do with a baby and watched in awe as his pretty young wife took care of it. Then, as was his pattern for years, he went back out on Navy tour again. When he came home on leave, my mother met him eagerly, excited to see him and show him the growing baby. Most of my mother's time was spent without him, and most of my sister's first year of life, she had her mother to herself. Then about a year later, my brother came along. With this second child, my father was less puzzled. As the kid grew up a bit, he'd be able to do boy things with my brother, like hunting and fishing. Though my sister was still her mother's little girl, she was no longer her only child. She had been supplanted. My father's visits home were special occasions. He talked to his wife about exotic foreign places he'd been, with names like Tripoli and Lisbon, Cartagena. He talked of minarets and palaces, gondolas in the Alps, and said someday he'd take her there. She said she hoped he would. His wife cooked him his favorite food and talked about the kids, how they were sleeping through the night, then walking, talking, potty trained. She talked about the house, how she had rigged a clothesline when the dryer broke and fixed a leaky sink. I'll stop with that one there to get this different sense of different kinds of tones and language I'm working with. And I think I'm going to end with another piece. In some ways it's about childhood, but it's about rethinking some of the stories we hear as children. A lot of this book, Not Heaven Somewhere Else, is pulls from Grimm's fairy tales or Walt Disney or TV shows we would have encountered as kids and kind of revamps them. So I'm going to read more from this, my last book called Not Heaven Somewhere Else. This is a piece called The Mermaid. She wanted to be what she was not. She tore apart a part of her. She made herself not speak. She wanted, oh, if only, who could love her? She made herself breathe differently. We do not breathe the same. Some breathe in water, some in air. A dictionary says this of a fish: a limbless, cold-blooded vertebrate animal with gills and fins and living wholly in water. She wasn't that. She wasn't half. Oh, what could she be now? Sometimes she can't tell things apart. Things don't make sense sometimes. She wanted to be remade anew. She made her fish nor fowl. She gasped and gulped and tried to hold. Can someone be what she is not, or hold what can't be held? Could someone love her? One time from far away, she'd seen a prince. She saw him on the beach or throne or horse or somewhere she could not recall. He waved to her, and she thought, but had or had she not waved back? She wanted to see him in the flesh. She wanted to see him forever. But she couldn't tell what had been seen or only hoped. Was she a fool to hope? For who, oh, could he ever love her? Her mouth hurt with the want of him, his body and his blood. She hurt with hope and was afraid. Would hope now be the death of her or life? She waited on a rock. Her mouth was dry. The sun and waiting dried and burned and turned her like a leaf. She couldn't breathe in or out of it, nor speak, nor swim, nor cry, was neither fish, nor fowl, nor girl, nor body, nor blood, nor he. She flopped like a fish who couldn't flop. The sea washed up. The sea rolled back. Some junk was on the beach. Though papery like a leaf, it oddly stank. A part of it was torn apart. Oddly, he gave it a burial. I believe this is something. Thank you for listening. I'll end there. Thank you.
Okay, so So our next reader is Kevin McIlvoy. Thank you, Rebecca. That was lovely. The first book I ever read of Kevin's was Little Peg. It arrived in the mail with no note from a very close friend. When I read the book, I had the sense that I'd never read anything like it before. It demanded I slow down, that I hear its insistent rhythms. It is the story of a woman's anger and grief over her own losses from the Vietnam War, as she writes and rewrites her creative writing students' stories. I loved Peg in all her large awkwardness and surprising wit. Shortly after, I discovered A Waltz, the first novel published by Lynx House Press. It is a dark novel of a hotel where the walls talk and murder feels like a shadow, where all time seems to be happening at once. And it remained one of the strangest books I've read, I would say, tying perhaps with Rebecca Brown's The Dogs, until I encountered Kevin's most recent title, One Kind Favor. There's a calling out in Kevin McIlvoy's work, a fury, and also an unwavering insistence for a justice of the heart. Karen Bender writes, Kevin McIlvoy is a writer of incisive moral vision, and One Kind Favor looks at the brutality of racial injustice in a North Carolina town with a powerful sense of place and clarity and insight. And Nina McConaughey writes, the music is uncompromising. You are drawn into strikingly beautiful, taut and relentless prose. The novel's hugeness of heart and fierceness will keep you reading. This book feels vital for our times. And finally, from Ryan Almacar Scott, squint into the mirror McIlvoy provides, but don't dare look at the grotesqueries and pretend you're looking into a funhouse mirror. This is what we really look like. Kevin McIlvoy has published 5 novels, A Waltz, The Fifth Station, Little Peg, Hyssop, At the Gate of All Wonder, and a short story collection, The Complete History of New Mexico. And of course, the book that's coming out right now. A collection of his prose poems and short stories, 57 Octaves Below Middle C, has been published by Four-Way Books, and he received a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Fiction. His short fiction has appeared in Harper's, Southern Review, Plowshares, Missouri Review, and other journals. For 27 years, he was a fiction editor and editor-in-chief of the national journal Puerta del Sol. He taught in the Warren Wilson College MFA program in creative writing from 1987 to 2019. He taught as a Regents Professor of Creative Writing in the New Mexico State University MFA program from 81 to 2008. And he has served as a fiction faculty member at several national conferences, including the Breadloaf Writing Conference in Vermont. He has been a manuscript consultant for the University of Nevada Press, Indiana State University Press, University of Missouri Press, and other publishers. And finally, from 2017 to 2020, he served as the fiction editor of Orison Books. Kevin McIlvoy has lived in Asheville, North Carolina since 2008. His poems appear in issues 84 and 85 of Willow Springs, and his interview is forthcoming in issue 88 of Willow Springs, which is due out in June. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Polly. You've spoken for my work from within my work. Means a lot to me. I am going to read from One Kind Favor, the book that is coming out. These pages introduce you to the town and the consignment bar that is so important to the town, and to Acker, who is the ringmaster of this Trump-era carnivalesque novel. Naming matters here in Cord. which was once called Cord, and before that, Curd. The most prominent business in town is the combined bar and consignment shop, owned first by Minister Stanley and next by Miss Acker and last by Junior Stanley. Rather than make a fresh sign, Miss Acker added her name when she was the new owner. When Junior took over, he crossed her name through and added his, reflecting no hard feelings. The sign, Stanley's, Acker's, Stanley's, told the story just fine. Eventually, Miss Acker was manager of the consignment, Junior was manager of the bar, and Minister Stanley was the all-round staffer. For generations of locals, Stanley's, Acker's, Stanley's has been a place of escape. Every community has such rabbit holes for those of us wishing to be ourselves and true selves and other selves. If you were a new regular, you were called Reg until people knew the name you wanted to go by. We understood that white presences and black presences were regulars, that they stayed, returned, were never gone long. We have known about the presences since the race murders here, 150 years of them. And since the time when Civil War Confederates and their descendants settled in this area, and since the first slaves arrived in chains and were assigned to tobacco or cotton farms, renamed, reassigned, resold, and since the years when Reconstruction cynically redefined the term free citizen. During the period since the Voting Rights Act, we have begrudgingly accepted the place name that does not appear on the town welcome sign. Exactly at the beginning of the Obama administration, our white population here first began to openly take pride in the specific designation, Crackertown. The Klan dead are here, and the living Klan is here. The dead NRA that values life and the living NRA that values profit is here. The Jim Crow Democrat dead are here, and the living Jim Crow and Jesus Crow jackboot white supremacists are here. The dead election riggers, so quiet but so brazen, are here. The living election riggers granted permission by the U.S. Supreme Court on June 25th, 2013, pay cash to buy election results that favor Trumppublicans who cannot win office without subverting the voting franchise. The war dead are here, and the living civilians and veterans who honor them are here. And here are the happy witnesses to the draft-dodging, illegitimate president spitting on the stones and into the open graves. Defending family and community against minority rights, the Southern Baptists here became the official religion of American apartheid before sesquicentennially healing declining church enrollments through racial reconciliation. Then, late in the 20th century, beginning their relentless effort to defend family and community against the rights of transgender and gay people and the autonomy of women and the safety of refugee children and families. The United Methodist Church's soul-dead believers in old school religious fundamentalism speak their poison words here, and the louder and louder homunculus word of faith cult and cults like it grow from the evangelical spore. The moneyed who died sucking the poor dry are here, sucking coke and pope, and more of the coke suckers and the suck popes and mercenaries are here than ever before, now that the red hats rule us, blood and soil. Acker was the one who got us into calling the spirits presences. We called them ghosts before that, and a long time ago, everyone called them haints. You couldn't easily tell when someone in the consignment bar was a presence. When a stranger came in, we gave each other signals. We rocked our heads the way you would to a little music, and that meant it was a real person. We nodded slowly up and down, a mild warning, and that meant it was a presence. Occasionally, one of us nodded at the same time the other person rocked. The ceremony could be confusing. An animal or plant could be a presence, though when that happened, and that did happen, we would rock, nod, guffaw, gasp, and give up and try again. A consignment item could be a presence for which we felt custodial responsibility. This is not a joke, is it? Acker 2 could be confusing, 30 or so, or 50 or 60 or so, or undefinably epical. She had a punk thing going from the white face makeup to the blue lipstick, black sometimes, to the white fingernails, to the bright white boots, so bright you could not really see her feet. And that, the blurring of her feet, is perhaps why she seemed without weight. She wore white kid gloves. Tattoos of slender tree stems, cardinal red, reached all the way down her arms and all the way up her snow-white legs into the crotch-high blue jean cutoffs she wore in the summer and autumn and early fall, and wore over web-glimmering white leggings in winter. She was lifelike. Her tattoos were lifelike. We knew it was thrilling for a young woman to see those shrieking fire-red stems reaching toward Acker's thighs. Realistic, am I right? She said to Woolman the very first time she caught his gaze. We were sure looking. All of us accepted Acker's invitation to look at her newest piercings and tattoos. We had seen Woolman's best friend, Lincoln Lennox, looking at her like that, looking and looking. Her arms and legs were slender, but bodybuilder strong, which mattered. Her muscularity was not more important to Woolman and Lincoln than the wonder of, the beauty of, her altered flesh and skin. On the wooden floor of the consignment bar and beyond, she cast unusually agile shadows. You felt they could leap into you. Our community in North Carolina was not at all where Acker belonged. But at certain times, revenants like her did appear out of nowhere, did grow here, became regulars and not, and regulars once more. Her exposed belly button, circled by the tattoo words, discuss rules beforehand, was pierced with a metal tuning fork, embossed with the ratio 3:2. Tiny, but real, the thing could be struck and sounded a severe, true, serene tone. She had platinum roots white hair. Most of the time it was a high, pale wave cresting above her forehead. She had a sewn-on pouch. It had been made to look like an alert erection, just under her jean zipper. And if she wanted to yank your chain, she called her codpiece Little Mike, petted him and said things like, "Little Mike likes, Little Mike listens, say it into Little Mike." Mike was a fake microphone, probably fake, but she and Mike's companion, Siri, could make you believe otherwise. She wore men's cologne splashed all over her arms and face, and she refreshed it throughout the day. And that was maybe a good thing because she vaped more or less nonstop, a certain kind of marijuana formula she called prom. She had a constant cloud of what looked like steam around her when she was mouthing the silver vape tube the size of an old school cigar tube. Voo, softly, voo. That was the sound her delivery system made. An aura came from her that was strong enough to alter you. We believed she was real alien. We speculated that she was alien real, a person who had crossed through all our naming systems, had left herself at the places she lived and died, and had brought some of her dead self and some of her living self to Cord. She knew where the passages were, the standing on the ground places and the feet in the river and the butt on the tree branch places, where one could be found by the entering or departing presences. When she arrived here in 2008, she said she already knew. Right in front of customers, the regs and the non-regs too. She lifted her skinny, muscular arms and kept them up in the air and trembled from holding them up so long. She said this posture was a yoga thing for which she had a name, BDSM. Explain, Siri. Acker would ask her iPhone, and Siri would answer, lifestyle of the bitch and infamous, or would answer, touring, while her Hugh machine mind engine searched humankind's coughing language faucets. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to read from One Kind Favor and the honor of reading with Melissa and Rebecca.
Siri. Okay, you have to kind of get a straight face on after that. It was great. Melissa Kwasny's poems bring me closer to myself, to that core of forgiveness and of connection with the natural and spirit-rich world, and with the mysterious inner life of the soul. Her collection, Where Outside the Body is the Soul Today, shook me deep into my bones. It called me like a bell to all the things this world so easily allows us to forget. It is a book that can be read and reread again, and every time you will be reminded that there's always a better, more connected life, that transformation is necessary and constant. And this comforting, this reminder of the boundless beauty of our interior lives and where those lives connect with the tapestry of the unseen world. Erica Fredrickson from the Missoula Independent writes, in Where Outside the Body is the Soul Today, Kwasny explores the soul like she's 100 Wallace Stevenses, looking at a blackbird, if the blackbird was a soul. And the result is a book that gives soul the kind of in-depth attention it's needed, in a way that feels fresh and specific and full. This is a collection that butts up against the idea that the soul is a pure, untarnished entity fit only for some afterlife in a heaven away from earth. It's also a collection about human limitations. The soul portrayed here is beautiful and messy, and our perception of it can't really ever be separated from the bodies we live in. Melissa Kwasny is the author of the poetry collections Where Outside the Body is the Soul Today, The Pictograph, The Nine Senses, Reading Novalis in Montana, Thistle, and the Archival Birds, as well as the novels Trees Call for What They Need and Modern Daughters of the Outlaw West. Her collection of essays is titled Earth Recitals, Essays on Image and Vision. She is also the editor of Toward the Open Field, Poets on the Art of Poetry, 1800 to 1950. And with M.L. Smoker, the anthology, I Go to the Ruined Place, Contemporary Poems in Defense of Global Human Rights. With Smoker, Kwasny was elected Poet Laureate of Montana in 2019. Thistle was a Silver Medal Award winner of Forward Magazine's 2007 Book of the Year Award for Poetry, and also the winner of the Idaho Prize. And Kwasny won the 2009 Cecil Hemley Award from the Poetry Society of America and the 2009 Alice Faye DiCastagnola Award. Reading Novalis in Montana was picked up by Anna Shavana of the Huffington Post as one of the top 10 books of 2009. Kwasny teaches in Lesley University's Integrated Teaching through the Arts MED program. Her work appears in issues 48, 54, 55, 59, 65, 70, 74, and in the upcoming Willow Springs issue 88. We interviewed her in 2007. Welcome, Melissa.
Okay, can everyone hear? Am I audible? Okay. Okay, I think I'll just start. I want to thank Polly for inviting me, and also for the really beautiful introduction, and also kind of prescient in talking about the invisible and the visible worlds that I like to write about, and kind of their correspondence. And I'll be reading poems that that kind of relate to that idea. I also want to thank Kevin and Rebecca, and I want to thank all my friends in the audience. Thank you for coming on a Saturday night to hear fiction and poetry. And here I am in Montana, and it's been snowing all day. Happy spring. I also want to thank Willow Springs, who, as Polly mentioned, has been publishing me for at least 15 years, and I'm so supportive of my work. I really love that journal, and I hope everyone keeps, if you haven't read it, subscribe to it. I'm going to read poems not from books this evening, poems that are mostly from the start of the pandemic, March 2020. And they're part of a new manuscript I'm working on that's provisionally called Glass Vocabulary, ways of seeing things to see through, invisible things like viruses, visible things, thinking about all that. I'd like to start with the first poem I wrote after the shutdown in March. I happened to, a friend of mine asked me to help her move a piece of stained glass across this little village that I live in. And it was winter, right, in Montana. And so we're the two of us on each side of a piece of glass. And it wasn't until I finished the poem that I realized what a metaphor that was, trying to move something so fragile. The week of moving glass. Did we breathe as we did it, focusing on our feet and the ice that sometimes softened into mud? Old, we felt the strain, our waists twisting in odd pain in order to face each other and still walk. So many dangers we didn't speak of, though we each had our list, a slip, a corner to hitting, a door jam, but worst was getting lost in the view. Sky underfoot is what it felt like, a tilting as if I were in a plane, clouds and blue in a panic at being captured. If the piece were round, it would have been more difficult. We slid our fingertips beneath an edge, then edged them in until we palmed it at its waist, like one might do for an ill person trying to stand. I wonder how many rocks I will throw in the river for each of my dead a year from now. Ground glass, they say, settling in the lungs. Glass in its plural form, what we drink from or where to see. Mirror or window, what we use to see outside the self. I am already dreaming about ways it could cause harm, to shatter, to sliver, to sever, a sibilance that makes me clench my teeth. We close our eyes, try to still ourselves, balance on our rope, extra arms poling as if they were wings, hoping we meet no cars, encounter no wind, only grace in retrospect after we lower it to the floor. Stained glass in which the color of everything is now absorbed, suspended, an act of death defying. When spring came that year, my partner dropped her glasses in the creek, in the rushing creek, and I look for them every day. I still look for them like a year later. And it became some kind of test for me or something. So this poem came out of that idea. Searching for the glasses you dropped in the creek. Like reading something difficult, for instance, a novel by Virginia Woolf, who requires we adopt her way of seeing before proceeding with the plot. I stare so intently into the current as it clouds and clears that when a dark shape swerves across it, I almost shout. Experiment. Believe the trout is showing me where water orbits two plates of glass. the offering a compliment to the sheer September air, the random accident of their meeting, a mirage. One night, a little tipsy, we explored the back streets of our small town until we came upon the same creek, blocks from the bar. Funny how it had seemed the happiest thing around. A river collects its tributaries like a heart spreads out its veins, ancestral path and ancestors all at once. A whole world we can be absorbed into like snowflakes on plowed ground, and always the earth will replace us. The force of autumn is toppling the last of our hot days under waves or farther down, maybe into the ocean by now. I admit your glasses will be almost impossible to find. Two black lines drawn on shade under the lips of stones. They will appear, if they do appear, as something foreign, not quite right. There is the very real possibility that they are gone. I used to be less interested in the invisible than what the visible has to say. Window panes are useless. Granite was fair. Still, I keep returning to the creek as if testing my powers. The ramparts of cottonwood, the thin tablets of ice, slipped between leaves that catch and pile at the curves. I moved back to this village, I call it, this very, very small town that I lived in when I was in my 20s. And I moved here a couple years ago. And at the same time, I ended up with a book I had read that wasn't mine, that was on the shelf. And it was Dion Fortune's book called Psychic Self-Defense. And I thought, well, I'll just read this again. It must be here for a reason. And this poem came from that. Rereading Dion Fortune's Psychic Self-Defense. Any act performed with intention becomes a right, the author claims. The trout kicks its tail, displacing sand. One sight must step down through water, counting the eccentric rungs. One must vacuum up strands of one's hair. The teachings I was once drawn to now feel vintage, like an apothecary in a ghost town, dusty vials still on the shelves, coarse remedies that might just as easily harm me. What I know, ghosts are gray because they are merely shadows cast from the dead. Beauty often leads to the divine. The earth here, disturbed by miners, emits radon, some say a cure for pain. In healing itself, can earth yield to us an influence? The book names 4 conditions under which we may meet the unseen, in places, in people, in losing one's way, or in falling victim to illness, whether in body or mind. I wait thinking about the corridors the ancient ones walked, following the mammoth, the bison, then 9 feet tall. Enormous herds of pronghorn whose species remained unchanged, each square inch packed with their destinies and bones. One settler's plow can tear up evidence of occupation spanning thousands of years, mixing liquor bottles with spear points, tin with obsidian, not relinquished until worn down to a nub. Let us at least be kind to each other. Here at the crossroads, which I get a glimpse of when my mother falls asleep in her chair, arms lifting, hands circling as she mouths words I can't hear, in ether, the upper region beyond the clouds. I have gone through the fortune book and erased all the marks, the 5-pointed stars, the underlines, the marginalia I wrote when I was young. I've thrown away occult pamphlets I kept for years in my car's trunk, thinking what? That one day I would pull over and read them. The truth is, I have never had the heart for it, the danger or the risks. If one is unprepared, untrained, if the trick goes wrong, and we all fall down, the dead are true marginalia. I was once present as I am now, walking down the same road, past the backside of the village, the peeling houses, the ruined cars. What was I afraid of? What defense did I need? Just when I washed my hands of it, backed up from the ledge, content with my small specialties, finding lost things, remembering what someone did, the book returns, and why wouldn't it? Like stray broken threads, a spider's web I inadvertently walk into. Nothing frightening, nothing dangerous or wrong. I'm just going to read one more poem. During the last year, I lost my mother, and a lot of poems in November, actually, and so a lot of poems end up being elegies. This is not quite one. See-through. Her rooms are emptying slowly, like wavelets discarding shell and ovoid stones. Her back closet saved for last, silk and sandals. Can she still see the moon? Does it look the same from where she is? Fragmented and silvered with our emotions. We cling to last words as if they imparted more meaning just because there will be no more. Impartire, to share, to divide among us. Hold yourself straight, little goat, her dying mother said to Virginia Woolf. You've got to stop this, said mine, about my sobbing. As we get older, the body speaks louder. Its mitochondria, ancestral genes. Whereas when young, I was all self. I get used to the change in hours, less or additional moisture in air, that much has become indescribable. Who offers a tutorial on wind patterns, how to understand the tides? What watershed do we live in? Where does it drain? Where do we go when we die? See-through, a phrase we use most often as adjective, not act. Dresses, sleeves, and curtains, the windows of an envelope in which we place an address. Or the minutes as I push off into the softness we call sleep before the final folding over of the event. Woolf wrote of vibrancy she saw in colors after her mother's death. The glass dome at Paddington that at sunset glowed red, as if something were becoming visible without any effort. Light leaking from the door jamb of a crowded room at night. Or like my mother's journals, which have come to me, written when she was my age, 65. Paper so thin that the ink keeps bleeding through. Thank you.
I'm clapping for everybody else. It was lovely. All right. So that was fantastic. I think we're gonna open this up for Q&A now. And so you can, Sam, I'll just hand it over to you for this part.
So everybody, if you have questions, you can go ahead and put them in the question and answer tab, and we will answer them live. And if you're on YouTube watching this, I'm also watching that stream, and I will relay questions.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, I have one, and I just would like you all, because one thing you guys have in common is it's really extreme musicality, and I wondered if you'd be willing to address the role that sound plays in your work.
I'll go ahead and start since I was the first reader. I'm a prose writer, but I pay a lot of attention to syllable count, and I count my syllables. And certainly in the last piece I read, there are a lot of lines that don't go all the way to the right-hand side of the page, or they're on the page. They kind of look like 4 lines of a stanza of a poem or something. So I'm very conscious of making sounds and directing how the reader might hear something in a lot of my work. And the notion of a sentence as a unit that has its rhythm is I guess really important to me. And a lot of times my work will begin with hearing something like part of a sentence or part of a fragment and kind of pursuing that and following how it works. I just have to say that in listening to Melissa's work, I mean, I had this envy of poets. It's kind of like, they just like say it. They don't have to put all this other stuff around. And which is, it's a silly way to look at it, because I feel that, God, was it Pound or somebody said, poetry should be at least as well written as prose, or kind of inverting our assumption about that. But I think, I'm guessing that Kevin and I as prose, I mean, I certainly, in hearing Kevin's work, my sense is that he and I share a similar sense of the spoken word and the oral quality of something, that our work is about that more than moving the story along. And certainly the way he structures paragraphs about describing someone's body or describing someone's tattoo, or the way he leads up to the revelation of an image at the end of a sentence or paragraph, seems to me very much an oral quality. And so I think that, I guess, just in defense of prose writers, we have that too. It's not just poets, and clearly Melissa's sense of sound is profound. Those lines of writing that have a pause at the end that makes you listen to a fragment is profound. So anyway,
Yeah.
I guess in answer to the question, yes.
Yeah, to use the term that Anais Nin used, there's an in-source element that follows attentiveness to these oral qualities of the work, and for me, a lot of times, even as I'm composing, but of course necessarily when I'm revising, I'm thinking, is this sentence pouring or spilling? Because if it is pouring, it is somehow the equivalent of glissando, that unbroken music that pours out and comes back almost in a wave, and that's so different than spilling, which probably has its correspondence in music to arpeggio, which is the articulation of this, and then the articulation of this, and then the articulation of this, and I find that the work pulls me always towards being inarticulate and expressive. And so when I'm looking for what I can trust in the work most, it's the inarticulate that is verging into the articulate, as opposed to the articulate that is verging into the inarticulate. And this is why some of my heroes are, of course, the poets. The most inarticulate, expressive poet that I cannot stop rereading is C.D. Wright, and there's that quality in which the poems themselves seem to distrust articulation. And it's no surprise to me that Gluck says in Proofs and Theories that in the early poems that she was writing, she felt betrayed by the sort of neat articulation of some of the phrases and felt to herself, I need to unlearn that, don't I?
I just want to add that poets have an advantage because we have scoring built in, we have line breaks, and so we can try using line breaks and stanza breaks and all those moments of silence and rest that we can build into the form itself, that we can make it pretty close to how we want it to sound, how it sounds in our minds. For prose writers, you know how you want it to sound, but you have less control over how the reader will hear it. Mm-hmm. However, after writing 3 books where I was trying to understand the prose poem, learning it from some of my I was reading Renee Char, whose work I just adored in that way. But C.D. Wright's another poet who works in prose fragment, but she does have those breaks that she can rely on. But I think it's interesting to go to try those different forms, because in prose poems, what I learned was that instead of the phrase or instead of the line, you're dealing with the sentence. And so you have to think about the spaces, as you say, where does the rest fall? The rest falls with the end stop, with the period or the comma. And so seeing that differently and hearing that differently tuned my ear in a different way. So now I'm back to writing in lines, and I think they have changed because of that experience.
We have 2 questions about place. Ellen asks, can you speak more about place, either physical place or psychic and constructed place? And then Anika asks, I was particularly drawn to the use of the physical within all of the readings today, especially in the spaces discussed. In what ways, if any, does location influence your writing, both in the sense of having seen a location to incorporate into the writing, or the physical writing within a location?
I'll just briefly say that because sound is so important to me, it's the thing that I place my first trust in, the sonic qualities of whatever I'm writing about, a person's, a narrative voice, etc. The first thing I want to know as I write about a setting is what is the sonic quality of that setting. So for instance, in reading phenomenology, there's this idea of surroundability and directionality, that in some sonic environments, you hear things and you can find where they're coming from. And in other sonic places, you hear things and you have no idea where they're coming from. They could be carried on a wind that is blowing against the wall of the place you're at, or they could be coming from the floor of the place you are walking. A really rich setting has both this quality of surroundability. Surroundability suggests, since you can't find it, but it is an important quality of the work, it suggests mysticism, mystery, and the unnameable, the unfindable, whereas the sounds that are happening that are ones that you look to and you find them have this way of characterizing the place and sometimes quite memorably, the interaction of those two within a given place seem to suggest that within that setting, there's already a dialogue between what is these qualities, these sonic qualities of surroundability and these sonic qualities of directionality.
I'll just jump in. I'm trying to think of physical location, and my work. I feel like my work is so interior that I mean, in some of my pieces, I will reference, Texas or Italy or, the Cascade Mountains. But the so much of the work is really about a psychic state of the narrator. I mean, like just even in the last piece I read, the mermaid piece, I suppose it takes place on a beach or the water because where do mermaids live? But it's clearly less about ocean life than it is about the state of this woman feeling between the land and the water, between being this and that. And so the location is symbolic. I guess that. Oh, and one other thing I mentioned before everyone came in, the panelists and the sort of folks worked on the reading were just chatting a little bit, and I mentioned to Kevin that we had a friend in common in a book group I participate in, and the most recent book we've read is Mrs. Dalloway, which in many ways I've thought it was like, oh, it's a great book about London and just so London and the buses and the noise and for 5 weeks we didn't really talk about London. We talked about the interior state, and so it's kind of like, wait, like the location is the city of London, which Virginia Woolf loved, but so much of this is about the interior state of these characters. So I don't know. Melissa, do you know?
No, I don't know, but what I do know, it's a paradox. It's the paradox of the inner and the outer that when I was writing Where Outside the Body is the Soul today, which actually was inspired by a few poems by one of my favorite poets, Christopher Howell, who wrote a book called he wrote a couple poems called Letter to the Soul, Another Letter to the Soul. And I was thinking, what's the soul? How could I write a letter to it without, I don't even know what it is. But what I found that something that interior, which is the most interiority you can think of, was something I found out. I saw it outside. I saw it in other people. I saw it in trees. I saw it in places outside myself before I could ever feel it inside myself. And so I love the Virginia Woolf analogy, because I think the thing that you try to do as a writer most is pay attention. Mm-hmm. And so often when and it's a training in attention. And so I think at least poetry is, I know prose is from hearing you, that you're attending to things, and you're attending to things outside yourself, which brings you inside. It's a flicker.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question for Rebecca in the chat. Mary says, you said, if I remember properly, that the pieces you read were examples of your effort to try out different voices. Can you expand on that idea?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mary. I may have said exactly those words. I think my sense of like different voices is less intentional than observational post after the fact. I mean, meaning some of the work comes out kind of abstract and strange, and some of the work comes out very Hemingway-esque, close to the ground, sense of the real world. And so I work in a different modes. And so I don't start off a piece saying, I'm going to try this thing out, as much as something begins and then I see it, and is this a description of an external world or someone else's world, in which case, how do I convey that accurately? Or is this an interior something, and how do I do that? And so there's different, I mean, as a writer of, really an interior work like Me and My Psychosis, or describing the outside world, they're really different responsibilities. Like I can say whatever I want about myself, but to describe something from the outside is like, am I getting that right? Do people see what is, as opposed to like, do people come in and see what I am? And so there's different kind of modes of writing because of different impulses in me and different kind of responsibilities that the work demands. But I rarely start with, I'm going to try this, as much as I'm doing something. What am I doing? How do I move towards that? Or am I doing this and move towards that? I think.
I'd like to say, Rebecca, that one of the things that was amazing to me about that doll piece was that there was this sense that you were finding, discovering, and inhabiting the mother's desire. Why give these dolls to these two daughters? Why dress them in the matching outfits? There's even the speculation about the motive of the mother beyond the first exploration of those motives. And that does seem to me like the kind of attentiveness that it feels that all three of us are reaching for in our work. The sustained gaze that makes possible things to be discovered, like the consciousness of mother in that piece, but that also has its mysterious attachment to the daughters. You see the dolls. The dolls are, as all dolls are, wondrous and horrible. And there's just this triggering that comes from staying in the moment, holding the gaze and not looking away. That was quite wonderful to me. I may be also thinking of my mother because my mother's been gone for 6 years. She was very, very important person in my life. And my birthday was yesterday. So of course I'm thinking about her. Melissa, you spoke about the importance of your mother in your life. And there's a consciousness there that when I am at a sort of moment of educing in which things are making their way out of me despite me, one of the things that makes its way out is my mother and my mother's consciousness, and I can join my consciousness to hers and discover certain things. Anyway, I really appreciated that doll piece very much.
Thanks so much, Kevin, and thanks for invoking our mothers here. I mean, Melissa did as well, and before the reading began, you and I talked about New Mexico, where my mother lived for a long time. So where did we all come from?
Yeah.
And
my mother was she was a true storyteller, and in my opinion, a poet storyteller. And the reason I would say that is that like poets, she understood the expressive silence and could make a substantive part of any story she told the silences.
This next question is addressed to Melissa and all. The beautiful poems you read were all inspired by an event, carrying the panel of stained glass, searching for glasses, etc. Are these events the most common inspiration for your poems? Are they ever inspired by a word, a line, a metaphor?
Sure. I in these, yes, that's true. That's a really great question. The way that I usually work is I have some kind of focus. In past books, the focus has been, as I said, attending to something. But for instance, in Pictograph, my focus, I was going to different pictograph and petroglyph sites all over, and so I would go there, look at it, and then let that inhabit me until I found what I needed from that experience. In this case, usually it's a trigger of something that makes me, to tell you the truth, during this pandemic, I feel like everything's a metaphor. And so everything that happens to me, I think, oh my gosh, this is, I have to understand this metaphor of dropping the glasses in the creek, or moving the glass across, or one poem, Glass Vocabulary, actually came from, I asked someone who works with glass all the different words that she uses in working with glass, the glass vocabulary. And so I started thinking about all those vocabularies. So usually I have a entry point, and then I think of them as kind of clusters that I welcome everything in that has anything to say about that to me. And it might be a week, it might be a month, might be, it's over in 2 days, kind of this self-cast trance, I like to think of it as. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it's a hard question. Good one.
We have another question for everybody. Corey says, with regards to that psychic state / interiority of a narrator, or perhaps that of a poem or voice, how do each of you approach that? Do you write and find that state along the way, or do you sit with the narrator / poem and think through the mental state and use that kind of thinking / planning to construct the tone, voice, lyricism to convey that?
I'll jump right in. This one actually is kind of easy. Unless when I was writing like criticism or reviews or a newspaper anthology says write something about blah, then I kind of have something to move towards. But whenever I write like my own stuff, no way did I think it in advance or plan. It's like planning in advance for me is the kiss of death. It's like, oh, where does it go next? And it's like, for me, it's thinking my way into something at like what would I do artistically with this is like a killer. It's a very mysterious origin, and when it comes, it comes, and when it doesn't come, it doesn't come, which is most of the time. Mm-hmm. Just saying. But I for my work, thinking a theme towards or a story towards, it doesn't happen. The thinking comes really late in the process where I'm like kind of going, I'm missing a syllable, or I'm, okay, how do I, it's like, something's missing. What do I, that kind of thing. But it's really late, and it's on a sort of word and sound and syllable thing rather than like big picture concept for me.
Definitely true for me too. I believe in autopoiesis, the way the thing makes itself. And what is so exciting to me about every session that I'm lucky enough to be writing is to watch how it creates itself and fights with what is me trying to construct something beyond what it is creating, beyond my will or my conscious control. It's part of what energizes me about every writing session, and so I'm where a turn occurs from a progressive consciousness in which a character is attending to everything around her or him, and it makes that turn into what is going on inside the character. The sentence has created the condition for me going there, as opposed to me having a plan and saying, oh, here we go. Now this is part of the larger direction that I want for the work. And that is, to me, that's just the thrill of writing, is to be present for how it creates itself moment by moment.
Good.
We have another question for Rebecca. Mary says, you said, if I remember properly, that the pieces you read are examples of your effort to try out different voices. Like, have we?
Did this one? Yeah, I think she put it in 2 places.
I see.
It skipped over the first time. Yeah. Well, this is great. I was just gonna, I think you guys have addressed this, but maybe as a final question, unless, does anybody have anything else? Do we have any others that we're missing?
Don't
Okay.
see any other questions.
Okay, I just want to ask one thing, and if you've already addressed it, just say I've really already addressed this. But I felt like at the end of this reading that I'd been spellbound. I mean, like, I don't mean it as a reviewer says spellbinding novel. I mean that I really felt as if the readings themselves had put spells on me. And Melissa had said, the self-cast trance. And I think part of this has to do with the musicality and the rhythm of the works, and that what y'all just said about not knowing where you're going. But I wonder if you could address the ways in which writing for you is a spell, is a trance, and maybe of your own work and or of work that you love yourself.
I think the music plays a huge part in that. So in that casting of a spell, that the first time I heard poetry read aloud, I was in high school, and I felt the same way. I felt like somebody had come in and just cast a spell. It's different than the language that we use. I've said this before, but Mallarmé says speech is commerce. I use this to get what I want. But when it's lyric, when it's musical, it tends to do that it quiets everything down, and it focuses everything to that music. And I think we've always got all these things going on around us, but when we can attend to that music, it slows everything down, which I guess is what we mean by spellbound, being spellbound.
Music. I vote for music. I vote for music always pulling us under, and the rhythmic quality of prose being something that we can trust without distrusting meaning and theme, but giving music its due, and trusting that the way it pulls a person under is something that's already deep in our bones. Any of us who have experienced oral storytelling at a formative stage of our lives have been present for someone telling a story that goes on for an hour, 2 hours, longer, that is a sustained song, and that afterwards, if you asked us, what do you remember about that story? We would say, I remember I was drawn under. And then at last acknowledging what you were drawn under by was the rhythmic and quality of language, and the subtlest, quietest changes in what Melissa called my acts of sibilance in her poem.
All right. It looks like we're done for the night. That was fantastic. Thank you all for coming out, readers and listeners alike. And we do have an after party for anybody who would like to come. If you haven't received an invitation by email or some other way, and you would like to come, and you know one of us, just send us an email and ask. And we're going to take 15 minutes so you can get something to eat, get a drink, come back, and meet us in another cyberspace. And otherwise, go out and enjoy the weather because it's spring.
I just
So
want to
great,
say,
so
thanks
grateful to
again.
meet you, Rebecca and Allison.
I just want to say thanks again to Polly and Sam and Ben for putting this together. Wonderful to meet you, Kevin and Melissa. Sorry, I'm not going to join you guys for the after party. I have a dinner date already planned before I heard about the party, but what a joy and a gift to hear both of you guys read, and to be part of this listening and speaking and questioning and answering group of people. It's, it's like it's taken me a while, but thank goodness for Zoom and YouTube and the whole thing, right? Okay, thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye, Rebecca. Bye-bye.
Should I end it?
I think you have to go ahead and end it for